This is a Japanese pickup truck. I know, tiny, right? They're one of the most popular trucks in the world, but in North America, they're almost nowhere. But now there's one in my garage, and in this video I'm going to be making it into the tiniest, cutest little camper. Even though this thing's small, I'm giving it everything you need for a night away, like a bed, plumbing, and even a touchscreen TV. This fall, I bought this tiny Japanese pickup truck off a guy on Marketplace. This is a 2005 Suzuki Carry, weighing in at a whopping 1,400 pounds, standing 5'7" tall, and bringing a massive 49 horsepower. Oh yeah, and it's also right-hand drive, which messes me up every time I go to get in it. I bought this mainly because it's cool, and I've always wanted to make a camper in the back of one of these tiny trucks, so let's get to it. To start off, I had to take a bunch of measurements of the bed of the truck so that I could design my camper accordingly. And now let's start building. For the framing, I was planning to use this 2x2 lumber I got at Home Depot. But after bringing them home and measuring them, these are actually only 1 3/8 thick, and I need a full 1.5 inches. So instead I got this 2x6 that is 1.5 inches thick, and I'm using a table saw to cut it into a bunch of squares, basically milling my own 2x2s with the true 1.5 inches thickness. You'll see in a little bit why I care so much that this is an exact 1.5 inches, but it's basically going to save me a bunch of headaches later on. And now I'm ready to start the framing. I'm using a miter saw to cut all the pieces to length according to my plan. This is obviously a pretty nice one, but up until recently I actually was still using a $40 miter saw I got off Kijiji, so this is possible with pretty much any level of tools. To assemble everything fairly quickly, I first tacked everything together with a brad nailer, and then this holds everything in the right position as I come back with some 3-inch screws to fasten it more securely. This first piece is the framing for the floor, and I'm attaching this piece of 3/8 inch plywood as the subfloor, fastening that down with some more screws. I'm trying to pay attention to weight since the truck doesn't have a very large payload capacity, so this is pretty much the only plywood I'm using in this build, and the rest of the structure will be kind of a foam fiberglass mixture that I'll show you shortly. Now working on the bottom side of the floor, I have to fill in all the gaps between the framing, and for that I'm going to be using some of this 1.5 inch rigid foam insulation. I cut my pieces to size with a track saw since I have one, but you could easily just use a normal circular saw on a straight edge. With a piece cut, I can pop it into place between the framing to perfectly fill that void. And this is why I spent so much time milling my own lumber before, to get them to be exactly 1.5 inches thick. Since that's the thickness of this foam, everything fits together nice and flush, and I don't have to do too much sanding as I would have otherwise. And this floor piece is done for now. I'm obviously going to be doing some more work on this later on, but let's move on to the walls. So the wall framing is going to be built really similar to the floor with those 2x2s. A major difference is up at the front I have this radius. To make this curve, I have a scrap piece of this 2x6 and I'm cutting each end to the angle I need using a speed square and a saw, and I just figured that out using my 3D rendering. By the way, all the renderings and plans for this build are out for free on my website if you're interested in building something like this. So now that that piece fits in place, I'm using a pretty simple radius method using a screw and a string, and just holding the pencil at the right length to create that curve. This took a bit of trial and error, but after a few times I got it just about right and I can cut it out with a jigsaw. Now I can fasten this piece into place permanently. I also added some cross bracing in the corners of each of the walls to give this thing some lateral support and keep everything square, and now these are ready to dry fit. With everything looking and fitting good, I cut some more foam to piece into all of these wall panels. I tried to cut these panels pretty snug so that they fit pretty securely between the studs. And since these wall panels are open on both sides and don't have any plywood, they do kind of wiggle back and forth a little bit. So to hold this until it's fiberglassed, I just used the brad nailer and just shot some nails in through the frame that basically tack this in place and hold it relatively stable. Before I assemble these walls into a camper shape, I'm going to be fiberglassing the inside face because it's much easier to do this now when they're flat than when it's all pieced together. So I'm using a sander to go around and sand all the foam flush to the studs, as well as take off the glossy layer on the top of the foam. And with that done, we can smooth this out. This is a little trick I learned in a video a few years ago. You can actually just take some regular drywall mud. I got this lightweight stuff so that the final camper isn't quite as heavy, and spread this along our wall panel to smooth out all the gaps and ridges and cracks and dents. I'm basically installing this exactly like I would on the interior wall of a house, getting it as smooth as possible. And I know what you're thinking, isn't this all just gonna bust apart since this is a moving structure? And well, if I just left it like this, absolutely it would. But this is basically just to make the surface as smooth as possible for the fiberglass, so it looks nice and flat and perfect once it's finished. And by that point, the drywall mud's going to be completely sealed in with epoxy and fiberglass, and will have nowhere to chip or break apart to. It's just a cheap little hack I learned on one of my bike camper videos, and it's still holding up 3 years later, so let's do it again. Next, I need to mix up some epoxy resin, so I have this West System 105 and I just mixed it up according to the specs on the can. This stuff's not super cheap and I used about 3 cans of it throughout the whole build, so you can probably find a more cost-effective alternative on Amazon or something. Anyway, I'm just going to apply that onto the wall using a regular paint roller until there's a thin layer of epoxy. If you're even more limited on budget, there's another alternative called Poor Man's Fiberglass, which basically uses wood glue and cloth, which achieves a somewhat similar result to fiberglass and is about a quarter of the price, so give that some research if you want. Or even better, here's a video where I use it. But for this project I'm using real fiberglass, so I have this 10-ounce fiberglass sheet that's also 60 inches wide, so I don't have to have too many seams. I rolled this out over top of my wall panels and then made sure I got out most of the wrinkles. And then I can drizzle some more epoxy on top of here and use a trowel to spread it out evenly across the fiberglass sheet. I took my time making sure to fully wet out the cloth, and then I'd go back and keep scraping with the trowel to take off any of the excess epoxy so that it cures up nice and smooth. So after about 4 or 5 hours, I'd come back and this epoxy would be partially cured to the point where it's now fairly hard, but it's still a little bit malleable. This is the perfect time to trim back these edges, because if I wait till this fully cures up, I'd have to basically cut this off with a saw. Where now I can do this in 2 minutes with a knife. The next day, the epoxy is fully cured and I'm taking some 120 grit sandpaper in my sander and sanding down all the surfaces to get this ready for paint. So first things first, I'll be priming this surface. So I have some of this Bullseye 123, and I'll be rolling that onto the fiberglass using a normal paint roller. Next, I have this exterior satin paint that I'm going to be using as the finishing coat on both the inside and the outside of the camper. I'm just finishing these interior surfaces right now, and then I'll do the outside all later once the whole thing's assembled into one pod unit. Again, I just rolled this on with a normal paint roller, and this took about 3 coats to get a perfectly white coverage without being able to see through it at all. And after that dries up, I'm ready to begin assembling this camper. Starting off with the floor panel, I have the plywood side up for the subfloor. And I had already done the fiberglass on the bottom of this so that I don't have to flip the whole camper over later when I'm doing the rest of the exterior fiberglass. To install the wall, I'm first using a couple of these scrap pieces of wood screwed to the edge of the floor panel so that I can line up the wall perfectly flush with this. And then using this really long impact bit, I'm putting a diagonal screw down through the wall framing to mount it to the floor. I'd use some more screws to screw all the wall panels together, and that's pretty much it. Pretty simple stuff here. So that's as far as I'm going to go for now, so that I can still work on this interior and not have to crouch down underneath the ceiling. But this is looking a little asylum white already, so I'm going to add some wood to break that up a little bit. I got these 1x6 shiplap cedar panels at Home Depot, and they just click together like this to make a nice wood wall pattern. These are also under 1/2 inch thick and made of cedar, which is already really light, so this is barely going to add any weight to the finished unit. I'm adding this paneling over top of this front wall to break up the continuous pathway of white. So I used some construction adhesive along the stud line and then just used a brad nailer to tack each piece into the stud. Later on, I'd come back and fill each nail hole and sand it flush to give it a nice finished look. With the wall done, I have this little ledge that comes out from the overhanging portion of the camper here that hangs over the cab. And I'm going to add some construction adhesive to this, and then I have this scrap piece of walnut I had laying around the shop, and nail this on here as my shelf end cap. Then on top of the shelf, I just added on this piece of 1/4-inch plywood. This is right up at the top of the camper, so you won't even really see this, but this would be a good place to set clothes or whatever else. Then as a final touch to all this wood, I added some Danish oil to give it that finished look and a bit of protection. Now I can start working on the interior, and a while ago I took some accurate dimensions and kind of laid everything out to how I was going to want it, and then used SketchUp to make up some plans. First off, I'm making this kind of vanity cabinet, and most of this will be framed out of 2x2, so for that I can use those 2x2s I picked up at Home Depot that I never ended up using. So I cut all my pieces to length according to the plan, and then using some screws to screw most of this frame together. And that's about 3/4 of this cabinet completed in 20 minutes. For the front face, I'm going to be using some plywood, so I looked through my scrap plywood rack and found this sheet of 1/2-inch maple plywood. For the cabinets I've built for campers before, I've always just used plywood and built them pretty much the same way you would build kitchen cabinets. But the problem with that is that they end up being really heavy because you have a lot of plywood being used that isn't really necessary. So for this camper, I'm trying this new method, framing all the unseen faces using 2x2s, which is really light, and then only using plywood on the faces that are going to be exposed. This cabinet's also going to have an outlet in it, so I marked out the cutout for that. And then drilled a hole on each side of the cut so I could get my jigsaw in there and complete this rectangular cutout. This will house the standard electrical receptacle box, and we'll install the actual outlet once we're doing the electrical later on. So now I can install this face plywood onto the rest of the frame, and I just brad nailed it in place, and then I used some of these pocket hole screws through the 2x2s to rigidly secure this plywood. I went back and filled any exposed nail holes with some wood filler, and then I have these 3/4-inch thick pieces of maple that I cut up. I'm basically going to assemble these into a rectangle, and this is going to be the front framing of the cabinet that'll house a door inside of it. So I used this Craig pocket hole jig to drill some pocket holes in the pieces, and then fasten them together into this rectangle using some pocket hole screws. So now this can be screwed onto the front of the cabinet. And after some more wood filler to smooth out the seams, this cabinet's ready for a dry fit. So now I need to make the door for that opening, and I'm just making this door the exact same way I make kitchen cabinet doors. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail in this video because this is about making a camper, not about making a kitchen. But you can check out this video if you need to know exactly how to make kitchen cabinets. Anyway, now I have this shaker style cabinet door, so I'm giving it a finished sand, routing around the edges, and drilling in some pockets for these inset hinges. Now I can install this door onto the cabinet. And that's a pretty sleek little cabinet access here. Basically all the plumbing and electrical is going to be housed inside this cabinet, so this allows me to pretty much open this thing right up. And now let's start work on the bed/couch. Using some more 2x2s, I'm building up this bed platform, which basically just looks like another framed wall with a bunch of studs. Then I cut up a bunch more of these 2x2s to the same length for a bunch of vertical supports for the bed. For now, I'm just going to tape these into place, but I'll later fasten them once I'm sure everything fits properly. So all of these will just transfer that horizontal load from the bed platform down to the floor, and I'll still be able to access in underneath here by lifting up the mattress. Pretty simple system. And that's the basic idea for the bed framing done, but I'm obviously not going to leave it looking like this, so I have some more of the 1/2-inch plywood. And I'm cutting out some pieces to make an L-shaped face that'll cap around the outside of the framing. Underneath the bed, there's going to be a couple drawers that pull out, so I have to cut some openings in the plywood. To do that, I measured out my opening, and then I'm using the track saw to plunge into the wood and cut just my cut line. And then I have to use the jigsaw to finish up the corners of each cut. Now I need to deal with the exposed plywood edges. This is going to get painted so I don't have to get too perfect in finishing this, so what I'm going to do is use some wood filler and spread it all over the exposed edge, and then use my finger to really work that into the plywood. I had to do this on the top edge as well as the edges around where the drawers are going to slide in and out. And after that dries up, I can take some sandpaper to sand that wood filler flush, and that should leave a pretty smooth surface under the paint. And after assembling my two pieces and some finishing sanding and touches, this piece is ready for its dry fit. And that looks like it's going to work pretty good. Everything fits pretty nicely, so I'm going to take it all out for some paint. First off, I gave the wood a coat of that same Bullseye 123 primer I was using before. And after that dried up, I gave it a good sand with some 180 grit sandpaper to deburr everything and smooth this up for the final paint coats. For the paint, I'll be using this Sherwin-Williams Emerald Trim Urethane paint in Rosemary color. I've tested a lot of cabinet paints before, and this one seems to be the best for a consumer grade. It cures up nice and hard and scratch resistant and doesn't get tacky or anything. So I use it on pretty much everything. I rolled that on with a lint-free roller and a brush, and this took a couple coats to get full coverage. So now I can begin doing the final install of this furniture into the camper. Starting off with the cabinet, and then the couch. I screwed all this into the wall studs and floor studs wherever I could. And then I started adding some of this 2x6 lumber to make up some framing for the drawers that are going to pull out of here. To make the drawers, I cut up some more of that 1/2 inch plywood to the sizes that I need. And then I'm going to add some edge banding onto the top side of these pieces. So I have this maple edge banding, which is basically just a veneer strip of maple with some hot glue on the back. And I can iron that onto the wood. Trim it flush and give it a little sand over the edges. And now I can start assembling these into the drawer box. I'm using a brad nailer to stick these together with a few nails on each seam. And I'm also using some of this PL construction adhesive to grab this a little bit better. Since this is a moving structure, this will make sure the drawer never wiggles apart, because brad nails really don't have that much grab strength. For the drawer bottom, I have some 1/4 inch plywood, and I'm just using some more of the PL adhesive and brad nailing that on, and that should hold fine for the size of this drawer. Now I can mount the drawers into the couch framing, so I first have some drawer slides that I'm mounting onto the sides of the opening. And then I can slide the drawer into place. Next, I'm just using the scrap piece of wood to be a spacer, and then setting in the drawer face. This is just another piece of 1/2 inch plywood I finished up and painted the same color. And I used some PL adhesive to stick that onto the drawer, as well as screwed it in from the back. Lastly, I added on this minimal door pull, and that's a fully installed under couch drawer. While I'm working down here, I added in this receptacle. This is actually made for a desk, so it's an all-in-one unit. I just have to plug it into the power supply once I have one. So I have one more drawer to add in here. This is a big long drawer that's going to pull out from the back of the camper and basically act as an outdoor table and some storage. So I built this up pretty much the same way as the last one, just bigger. And I added in these pieces of wood that I countersunk down a 1/2 inch from the top edge, so that I could slide in these plywood tops. And this essentially gives me a drawer with storage that also doubles as a tabletop. Now that can be installed in the back of the camper using these big heavy-duty 36-inch drawer slides. And there's my storage systems pretty well fully done. Continuing on the cabinetry, I need to make a countertop. Lucky for me, I actually had this laminated walnut piece made up for my tiny house that I never ended up using. This is a 3/4 inch thick laminated walnut solid wood panel, and it's pretty much perfect size for this cabinet. I cut the piece to width and length with the track saw, and then I actually cut it in half so that I have these two different portions of countertop. And this first piece I actually want to have hinge up so that I can access into this back portion of the cabinet. So again, using that hinge drill jig, I drilled in a pocket for the hinge as well as some screw pilot holes, and then mounted this concealed hinge. I sanded the piece on all sides up to 180 grit, and added this 1/8 inch round over to soften the edges. Now I can install this onto the cabinet. With the piece set in roughly the position that I wanted, I marked out the hinge placement, and then popped off this satellite portion of the hinge and mounted it onto the cabinet, and then the hinge will just click right into here. And that works pretty good. Underneath here is going to house all my electrical, so I'll be able to lift this up to access the power bank and all the wiring and everything. So this makes that all very accessible. So the second piece of countertop is going to house my sink. I found this cool RV sink on Amazon that I'm going to install in here. It actually has a wood covering that goes over top of it and basically just continues the countertop right over the sink, and then you just remove it to access the sink. So first I'm using this cutout template that was provided with it and tracing it onto the wood. And then drilled out the corners with a drill bit so that I could get my jigsaw in here and complete the cut lines. This sink is going to be an overmount, so I don't have to be too perfect with my cut line since there's a little lip that's going to cover this up. And with that fitting, I can sand and route and prepare this countertop for finish. For the finish, I didn't want to buy anything for something this small, so I looked through some old bins and found this like 3 or 4 year old Odie's oil. I got the walnut ready for the finish, giving it a good wipe down with a microfiber cloth, and now it's ready for Odie's. This stuff was a little crusty on top, but after I peeled that away, there was some good waxy paste underneath this. I put some globs of this around the piece and then worked that in using a white pad. And after that set in for a few minutes, I came back with some shop towels and wiped off as much of the wax as I could. This takes a bit of elbow grease. This stuff's pretty tough, but after a few minutes I got it down to this nice satin sheen. And now these can be installed on the cabinet. For the sink piece, I just used some silicone around the top of the cabinet framing and a couple screws to hold this in from the bottom. Then I put a good bead of silicone around that sink opening and dropped the sink into place. So like I was talking about earlier, you can cover up this sink when it's not being used, and it came with this almost walnut colored woodish board. And it actually matched pretty close, but instead I'm going to take this over and use that sink cutout piece to cut out this shape in the same walnut as the rest of the countertop. And now that matches perfectly. So the cabinet underneath the sink with this access door is going to be where I'm housing all the plumbing. Starting off with this 12-volt pressure pump. I'm just using some 1/2-inch PEX pipe and brass fittings to make up a discharge pipe here. It basically just comes out of the pump outflow and wraps around over to these 2 faucet valves. And if you've never used PEX before, it's really easy. You just clamp these rings around the pipe and fitting, and it's pretty much always waterproof. Both of these are just teed into the same water line because I'm not going to have a hot and cold water tank. It's all the same water. Then I'll be able to attach the sink supply lines right onto these valves. On the pump inlet, I just attach this flexible vinyl piping that'll suck water out of the storage tank, and the pump will pressurize it and feed it into the sink through those supply lines. Pretty simple. To store the fresh water and the gray water, I bought 2 of these 5-gallon RV storage tanks, and they'll do exactly that, store water, whether it's dirty or clean. I'm going to feed my supply and drain lines through the lids so that the tanks are still removable. So I just drilled through the proper size hole. And now those 2 tanks fit in place perfectly underneath the sink. Lastly, I hooked the pump into the power supply, which I'm going to talk about next, and tried it for the first time. This is an EcoFlow River 3. It has about 300 watt hours of power capacity, and it's going to be my power bank to run all the electronics of the camper. This has all the AC and DC outlets that I need, as well as the ports to plug in solar panels and simple AC charging. I also added on this modular extra battery, which actually gives me a total of about 900 watt hours of power capacity. You could build your own battery system for this, but honestly these power stations have gotten so cheap and they're an all-in-one solution, you don't really have to do that much work to set them up. Just setting that in there is pretty much its setup, it's ready to go. I just need to distribute its power around. So to do that, I first have this 12-volt fuse panel, and then I'll be connecting that to the power bank using this car plug, which is compatible with the EcoFlow. So on the raw ends of this plug, I'm putting some ring terminals on here to make it easier to connect to the fuse panel. All you do is just crimp these on and you're good to go. And now I can connect these to the positive and negative terminals of the fuse panel. So now I can plug this whole thing into the EcoFlow and this fuse panel will be powered. So I'm going to show you this out here because in the cabinet is pretty impossible to film, but let's just pretend this is a line coming in from the water pump or another DC thing that's in the camper. I'm again just connecting some ring terminals onto the raw ends of the wire. And then I'll be connecting the positive wire into one of these positive terminals and the negative into this bottom negative bus bar. Then I need to pick the appropriate size fuse for whatever I'm installing, and that just pops in the fuse slot here and that'll protect this whole circuit. And that's pretty much it for DC power. I just connect the lines from each appliance right into the fuse block. AC is even simpler. I just have this power bar that's going to plug into one of the sockets on the EcoFlow, And then I can just plug in the receptacles and the TV and whatever other AC things right into this. So I mounted the fuse box and the power bar inside the cabinet and plug them into the EcoFlow. And now I can start hooking in all the lines from all the utilities. Speaking of utilities, I haven't really added any yet other than the water pump, so let's get on that. I want there to be a TV in here, but I also wanted something sleek to the wall, so the solution I came up with that was pretty cheap was this Amazon Echo Show 21-inch screen. This is a touchscreen home planner thing, but it also has smart TV function, so I can watch Netflix and YouTube and whatever on here. It also only sits about an inch off the wall, so this should be perfect. I screwed the mounting bracket into the wall and the TV just snaps right into this. I also made sure I had some wood blocking in the framing behind this so that I wasn't just screwing into foam and fiberglass. So this screen is powered by this special adapter, and my original thought was I was just gonna cut the wires and solder an extension in here. It's not quite the type of cable I thought it was. But turns out this doesn't just a standard 2-wire cable, so I had to buy another adapter. And then I got this 10-foot extension cord that I can plug in and run this extension cable through the wall up to the TV to power it. Speaking of running the cables through the wall, I already have all the framing closed in with insulation, so I'm going to be routing a slot in using this tiny straight flute router bit. And from the outside, I'm basically just going to trace on the path that I need to run this wire and route in about a 1/4 inch deep slot that I can ultimately run the wire through. All the wires will lead back to this one area that feeds into that cabinet inside, where the power bank's housed. For most of my utilities, I'm using this 18 gauge 2-wire silicone wire, with a couple exceptions like the Amazon TV cable. After I've fed the wire into the slot, I can hot glue it in place to make sure it doesn't pop out until it's fiberglassed over. So I routed in a bunch more slots for all my wiring, like the lights and the vent and the TV. Some of this wiring had to run to the ceiling, which doesn't exist yet, so I just ran it up to the top here and fed it through the wall. And then left a bunch of wire on the other side that I'll connect in through the ceiling later. I also had to add this light switch, so on the interior wall I marked out where I wanted that and then routed in this maybe 3/4 inch deep pit. And then with my in and out wire running into there, I can connect in the switch and screw it into place. I also connected a light on to the end of this circuit here temporarily just to make sure everything's working and there's no issues, because once this is fiberglassed over, this is unchangeable. Lastly, I drilled through some fairly big holes to fit the head of that TV cable and glued this into the exterior of the wall the same as the other wires. Down in the power cabinet, I can connect this into the AC power and then connect the TV and mount it and make sure that's working. Like I said before, this isn't actually a TV, it's like a home base that you would have in a kitchen usually. So it's touchscreen, but that actually works perfectly for this small space since I'm sitting on the couch right in front of it. So now I need to start making the ceiling and the back wall. Starting off with the ceiling, I'm milling up some more lumber. This time I'm actually making it 2 inches wide instead of 1.5 inches because I'm going to have some electrical to run through here that you'll see in a second. Other than that, I'm framing this up the exact same way and using some more 1.5 inch insulation between the studs. I'm going to have 6 12-volt pot lights in the ceiling, so before I install the ceiling wood, I'm going to run the wiring through here. I routed in some passages through the framing so I could easily feed the wiring through here without going into the foam, and that's why I wanted these boards to be 2 inches wide instead of 1.5 inches. And then I left a hoop of wire at each one of the marked light locations. For the ceiling covering, I'm using that same shiplap cedar that I used for the front wall earlier, and mounting that on with some construction adhesive and a brad nailer. I used a hole saw to pre-drill my lights so I didn't risk going into the wiring, and worked my way across the ceiling. I figured it'd be way easier to mount this cedar on the workbench and then install this entire roof panel onto the camper as one piece, so that I don't have to install each board into a tight, confined space while working upwards. And now, after some wood filler and a good sand, this is ready for its Danish oil finish. So while I have the ceiling flipped right side up, I can actually install most of these pot lights. And all I have to do that is cut this hoop of wire in the middle, and then strip them back and connect all the same color wires together using one of these lever nuts. Then I can connect in the pot light wires and the light will snap itself right into the ceiling. With my lights installed, I plug them into a power bank temporarily just to make sure everything's working again. And now this ceiling / roof is ready to be fitted to the camper.
It's not too heavy, it looks good.
We set the ceiling on some temporary pieces of wood to hold it while I fastened it in place permanently, and then I can connect in that remaining electrical. I also added these 2 solar cables to the roof, so I need to feed them down through the wall and into the power cabinet. And then I can install my last wall. But first, a little bit about how that wall was made. I framed it up and insulated it using the exact same methods as all the other walls. But this wall is all the doors, so I have to add some of these rounded corners. I tried to cut these out of wood using my jigsaw, but it wasn't very square or accurate. So instead, I 3D printed the exact radii I needed, and glued them into my door corners with some construction adhesive. Then this wall is ready for insulation and the same drywall mud as before, and then a layer of fiberglass. Another thing that's different on this wall is on these interior jambs of each of the doors, I added this strip of fiberglass. And then I have this 1/4-inch piece of plywood that I'm going to use to make a flange around the inside face of the door. Kind of like a doorstop. So I just have this scrap piece of wood I cut to the width I wanted, which was around a 7/8 inch, and trace this onto the plywood around the door openings. Then I can cut this out using a track saw and a jigsaw to round the corners. And then I'm applying some construction adhesive around the door opening. Then I can set my 2 wooden flanges in place, and after I make sure the measurement's about even around all 4 of the sides, I nailed it down with a brad nail. Then I can flip the piece over and give it a good beat of some paintable caulking along the inside edge. And now this will act as a doorstop, but it also acts as some weatherproofing. This flange will have some weather stripping on it later, so any rain that comes in through the door crack will stop here and just drain out at the bottom. Then after a coat of that same white paint, this wall panel can be installed on the camper. So that's all the walls and ceiling installed, but there's still some obvious areas that need plugged up here, like this massive hole at the front of the camper. So working on the interior first, I'm first going to take a couple 2x2s and just screw them across here. And then I'll be adding some more of that shiplap cedar for my interior finishing. Once again, I'm just using some construction adhesive on the stud and then using a brad nail to hold that in place until the adhesive sets up. And now the interior looks good, let's deal with the outside. For this, I'm going to be using some more of that 1.5-inch foam insulation. The problem is this stuff's too rigid to bend. So I'm making a mark about every 1.5 inches, and then using my track saw, I'm going to cut a slot about 3/4 of the way through the sheet. This removes enough material to allow me to bend this foam. See the scrap piece I have here that doesn't have slots has a really tough time bending, but my slotted piece curves into a light radius fairly easily. And now before I install this, I'm going to put some construction adhesive in these slots so that when I have it bent around, this adhesive will set up and basically bond that curve. I'm using some regular screws to hold the foam and then basically moving up 1 inch or 2 and throwing in another screw where the foam's level with the wood. Taking little bites like this, I can gradually bend the foam around into the exact curve of the wood. And that's a pretty easy way to add a curve to your camper. Once all the adhesive sets up, this should be locked in place, and even more so once there's fiberglass over top. And with the front sealed up, I have one more problem to deal with at the back. All right, obviously if I made this square, these walls would have connected a lot nicer. But I like the way the rounded look in the rendering, so I need to figure out some way to continue this radius all the way across. I thought of some ways to cut this out of foam, but then I figured probably the most accurate and honestly easy way to make this is with a 3D printer. So I designed up these sections and printed them out, and these have the exact radius that I cut the wood with. After giving them a quick sand on each side to scuff up their glossy surfaces, I can take them over and use some more construction adhesive to stick these together. Like I said, these come out of the printer really shiny and glossy, so you really want to make sure you scuff them up with a sander to make sure this adhesive sticks, as well as the epoxy and fiberglass later on. And that worked pretty good. It took about $20 in filament and a day to print, but that's a nice accurate curve. Now this camper body's fully constructed, time to get it ready for fiberglass. First off, I'm sanding all the surfaces, getting everything nice and flush with the wood framing, as well as taking the glossy layer off the foam. And then same as before, I'm using some more of that lightweight drywall mud to mud this over and get everything as smooth as possible for the fiberglass. It took a couple coats to get everything nice and filled and smooth, especially in areas with big defects like where the wires were run and around those top curves.
Alright, well, I'm an idiot. There's a window going in here between these two studs. And I ran these solar wires up here, so I have to chip all this mud out and reroute this somehow.
I'm actually glad I caught this before I did fiberglass. This was a 20-minute fix right now, and if I did the fiberglass, I'm not even sure how I would have fixed this, so good catch. Anyway, after a couple days of mudding and fixing those mistakes, everything's looking nice and smooth, and after one more final sand to get rid of any excess mud, we're ready to start fiberglassing. I'm going to be using the exact same epoxy and fiberglass cloth I used on the interior steps. And the process for this is pretty much the same, using a roller to put on my base coat of epoxy, and then rolling out the fiberglass mesh, and topping it off with some more epoxy and using a spreader to spread that around evenly. After I got the roof and back wall all done as one piece, a few hours later I can come back and trim off that excess again. And then the next day I can start up the sidewalls. It took a few days to complete this because I'd basically have to do a wall or two and then let that set up so I could trim off the excess. And by that time it was usually 9 at night, so I'd come back the next day and then start up the next walls. I've only used fiberglass once before, and that was years ago, but it's actually pretty satisfying. I was kind of intimidated going into this step, but it's actually pretty easy if you just take your time. With all my sides fiberglassed, I took a sander and went around the edges to smooth them over. And then I mixed up a little bit more epoxy and used a small brush to go around on all these edges and fuse the two sheets of fiberglass together. And that finishes it up. Lastly, I sanded all the surfaces, making sure to get everything as perfect as possible before paint. Also, definitely wear a mask, and I even recommend wearing some long sleeves when you're doing this because this fiberglass is real itchy, and if you get it in your lungs, it's impossible to get out. Anyway, fiberglass complete. Once again, I'll be using this 1-2-3 primer over all of the fiberglass, rolling it on with a normal paint roller. And after I gave it a coat, I actually gave it a quick sand to make sure the paint goes on nice and smooth. And now we're ready for a base coat. I have this Behr Ultra exterior paint in a satin sheen, and I'm painting this over the entire camper body. It took about 3 or 4 coats to get a nice even coverage with a smooth texture. And now we're on to the fun part. I use some of this gray to add a nice accent to the camper, and later on I'll use black for the trim. And this is one of my favorite parts of the entire project. It always blows my mind how much a good paint job makes a difference. A couple days ago this looked like a completely unfinished mess of a camper, and now I can see the final vision coming to life. Now I need to make up some doors. Before I installed this back wall, I had traced the outline of the door onto some 1/2-inch plywood and cut that down until it fit in the opening nicely. Then I'm using my planer to plane down some scrap 2x6s until I get them to exactly 1 inch thick. And then I ripped them in half with the table saw so they weren't as wide, and then I'm gluing a perimeter of these boards around the outside edge of the plywood. Now with the board and the plywood together, I have a total thickness of 1.5 inches, so this should match the wall thickness perfectly. Now I have to trim that solid wood to the exact shape of the plywood. Luckily there's a tool that makes that really easy. I can put a flush trim bit in my router, and this bearing will ride along the template, which in this case is the plywood, and perfectly replicate that edge onto whatever I'm cutting. With that sanded nice and smooth, it's time to fill in this inside cavity. I picked up some of that same pink foam insulation, but this time only 1 inch thick, and I cut it to size to pop in here snug. Some wood glue will bond this together, and I put a bunch of heavy stuff on here to hold that until that sets up. The door got the same fiberglass treatment as the rest of the body, and after some paint, it's almost ready to install. But first I need to install this latch. This is a standard RV door latch, and I marked out the cutout size. With the main holes bored out, I can do a dry fit with the latch. And then I had to use a chisel to make a little more room for this latch plate. On the other side, I can install the interior faceplate, and that's a working latch and lock system. I also had to install this window inside the door, but I'm going to cover the windows in a second, so I'll just time-lapse this for now. Now the door is ready to fit onto the camper. I set it on a scrap wood spacer and then checked around the edges to make sure the gap is about the same. And then I can screw on some stainless steel hinges. On the door jamb, I have to do a bit of work to get this latching plate to mount in here. And I had to drill out enough room for the latch and lock itself to be accepted into the jamb. And now that that's working good, I'm actually going to take off the latch and these plates and paint the inside to make sure it's all waterproof, because water will inevitably get in these crevices. And while that dried, I put some of this really thin weather stripping foam tape around the inside door flange. And that's the man door done. I also have this other small door that pulls out that long drawer that we installed earlier, and this one's just made fully out of wood because I didn't see any point in doing foam for the size of it. It wouldn't save much weight. I'm going to put a lock on here, so I drilled through the proper size hole, and then I'm installing one of these cam locks. Now this can be fit onto the camper. In a very similar way, I'm using a spacer to get that gap pretty even. And then this one I'm just screwing onto the drawer through the back side. Now it's finally time to make this thing feel less like a coffin and install some windows. So I bought these windows brand new, which is going to make this process a little bit easier because I have this trim ring for the inside and this cardboard template that makes making the cutout very easy. I measured onto the wall where I want the window to be placed, and I actually designed the framing of the camper specifically for this window so that I don't have to cut through any studs. And then I cut that out with the jigsaw. Now before I pop the window in here, I'm first going to install some of this butyl tape on it. This stuff just sticks around the inside face of that exterior flange, and this is going to act like the sealant between the window and the camper body and waterproof the whole thing. Butyl's really sticky and stretchy and expandy, so it's the perfect thing for a camper that's moving around all the time. It's going to adapt to those movements and keep the whole thing sealed. Then I can pop the window into its opening, and after I measure to make sure it's square, give it a good push to stick that butyl onto the body. The rest is pretty simple. That interior trim ring sits around the inside of the window, and I use the provided self-tapping screws to screw it in snug. As I tighten up the screws, it's basically sandwiching the camper body and using nothing but friction and the butyl tape to hold the window in place. And now that's changed the entire vibe of the inside. It makes it feel quite a bit more homey. Next, I have this roof ventilation fan. And I'm applying some more butyl around the edge of this and then setting it into the hole that's in the roof. I fasten this in with a bunch of these metal roofing screws, and these have a little gasket on them that keeps the screw from leaking. And then connect it in the wiring on the inside and use the trim plate to cover up the opening. This fan runs on 12 volts, so the wire just runs right down into that fuse box and into the power station. So we're getting down to the last couple things of the exterior here. Next, I have this solar panel that I got pretty cheap on Amazon. This is a 150 watt panel. It has an aluminum frame, and I'll be mounting this on the roof to charge up my power station. The panel came with these aluminum Z brackets, so I'm bolting these into the frame. And then I'll be putting a little strip of this butyl tape on the bottom of the foot so that when I screw this into the camper, it'll be waterproof. The panel is pretty large and it's probably going to catch a lot of wind up here, so you want to make sure this is being screwed into the framing, not just the foam. I made a little cheat sheet before I painted this of the measurements of where all my studs are so I could line that up easily. After I plug that in on the roof, inside the power cabinet, I have this adapter that goes from the MC4 solar cable to the XT60 connection that the power bank needs. Now, whenever I finally get this beast out of my shop, the sun should charge up that power station. One last thing on the outside before I move on to finishing up the interior. I have a couple of these RV power plugs that I'm going to install through the wall here right into the power cabinet. I have a male and a female one of these, so the idea here is that I'm going to be able to plug an extension cord into this and charge the power station without having to go inside into the cabinet. And also have this female outlet out here so I can plug in whatever I want and it'll draw power from the power bank. So I used a hole saw to drill the right size hole for my plug, and then I used a bit of caulking around the seal, and then I'm screwing the plug into place. Like I said, there's an inlet and an outlet here, so on the inlet side I'm going to plug in the charging cord for the power station, and then this will just plug right into the back of the power bank. And to power the outlet, I can just plug this cord right into the power bar inside here. So now when I plug in an extension cord, it begins charging the power station. And if I plug something into the outlet, I can draw power out of the battery. And that's the electrical fully done, and the exterior 99% done. But I gotta say, this truck camper looks a little funny without a truck. The day has finally come to lift this into the back of the Suzuki. I had to get a little bit creative to lift this up high enough. I used a combination of my little DeWalt floor jack and then this bigger farm jack I bought to lift this up bit by bit on each end before we finally got it high enough to get some sawhorses under there and into the truck. This was definitely a little bit sketchy, but we survived another day. My best guess for what this thing would weigh right now, roughly adding up the raw weight of the materials, is around 350 to 400 pounds. Which, for what it is actually really light. I mean, it's only two of me. And as much as I want to rip this thing down the road right now, there's a little more work to do. Specifically, I need to attach it to the truck so it doesn't just blow out the back. So I've got 4 of these heavy-duty stainless steel toggle latches. And after I found the stud and figured out where this is going to be placed, I can start fastening the 2 pieces. So first, the smaller portion is going to be connected to the truck body, so I cut away this plastic over top of the metal with a multi-tool. Then I pre-drilled some holes, and I'm going to be using some big number 12 stainless steel self-tapping screws to screw this latching hook thing onto the truck body. The toggle portion of this latch is going to be connected onto the camper body directly into the stud. So again, I pre-drilled some holes, and then I'm going to be using some caulking to seal this up. Around these stainless steel screws I fastened it in with. I adjusted it to the right tightness, and then I can just use a bolt to hold this closed. I added 4 of these in total, 1 at the front and 1 at the back of each side. So that should hopefully hold this thing to the truck, but I don't really know, I've never done anything like this before. But anyway, that's the outside fully done. Now back inside to finish up those last few things before I get this out on the road. First off, I obviously need some cushions here because this isn't a very comfortable bed right now. So I measured that out, and then I cut up 2 plywood panels in 1/4-inch plywood to be the base of the cushions. Then I picked up this cheap 6-inch mattress on Amazon that's going to be the cushion within the cushions. I cut away this mattress cover, and underneath I basically just have this slab of foam with a bit of memory foam on top. So this is perfect to start tracing out my cushion sizes and then cutting it up with a sharp knife. Now that fits pretty good, so I can start the upholstery. Now I am no means anything more than a DIYer when it comes to fabric, so I'm going to be wrapping these cushions in a very beginner-friendly method. I basically just rolled out the fabric upside down and then set in the foam and the plywood base. And then I'm pulling the fabric fairly tight around the edges and stapling it onto the bottom. The ends were then a little more complicated, but I tried to fold them as tight and neatly as possible. I also used some hot glue in these seams to hold them together because on my van cushions years ago, this extra fabric wanted to pull out all the time and it got really annoying, so hopefully this fixes that problem. And then this just folded up and got stapled on the bottom too. Think of wrapping a big Christmas present. That's pretty much how I wrap these cushions. So that works pretty good for the bed, but this bed also doubles as a couch, so I need a backrest. I don't want to make just a straight slab like the other cushions because it's not that comfortable sitting at a 90-degree angle. So I came up with an idea where I was going to use some of the extra foam from the build and cut all these pieces with an angle, slowly narrowing them out so that I could glue them all together onto the backer board and make this wedge-shaped cushion. Then I had to cut the mattress with this same angle, which I thought was going to be a little bit tougher, but turned out to be fairly easy. And then this backrest can be wrapped the same as the other cushions. The fabric's still a little wrinkly and creased right now, but that'll flatten out over the next few weeks. And that's a pretty good lightweight backrest. I also specifically made this a certain length so that I could take this away at night and put it down in the footwell, so I have the whole bed to sleep on. And now we're on to the last step of this build. I need to cover up this subfloor with something a little more finished looking, so I went to Home Depot and picked up this case of peel and stick vinyl that was only like 30 bucks, and is in walnut color, which perfectly matches the countertops. This stuff's pretty straightforward to install. You cut it to length and remove the backing paper, and stick it down one tile after another. And I have a whopping 6 square feet of this to install, so it took nearly 10 minutes. And that's it for this build. My very tiny truck camper is now ready for the road. The time has finally come to load up and take this thing out on its maiden voyage. First impressions driving this are pretty good. The Suzuki is already way underpowered even when it's empty, and adding all this drag only makes it slower, so it maxes out at about 80 kilometers an hour, but other than that, no real issues. Driving on the right side of the car and shifting with the left hand actually isn't that hard to get used to. Now I just need to find a spot to camp out for the night. Our snow literally just melted last week, so everything's still really wet and all the campgrounds are closed. So I'm gonna have to just find somewhere I have available to me. My grandma has a cottage about an hour away, so I thought I'd just rip up there and camp out for the night. I spent pretty much my whole winter on this project in anticipation of this moment. We're getting into my favorite time of year here where everything's springing back to life, and it's nice to finally be outdoors again. I've only used the camper now for this one night, but so far everything's working really good and it's actually way more spacious than you would think. It's the perfect sleeping spot for one person. Like always, you can get the plans for all my builds for free on my website at drewbuildstuff.com. I also just released this new merch design that I've been wearing throughout this ending, and it's available on the website too for a couple weeks only. Thanks a lot for watching this video, and unfortunately this is the part where I gotta quickly talk about the YouTube algorithm. If you made it this far, you probably liked watching this build, so leave me a comment and check out some of my other videos. This is going to greatly help the algorithm know that people are engaged and push this video out to new audiences and help me pay for future projects and newer, better videos. Because with how YouTube works nowadays, if this video doesn't perform in the first couple days, they'll shelf it and it never will. Every video I make takes a ton of time and a ton of money, so if you appreciate that, that's an easy way you can help out for free. Anyway, that's it. See you in a couple months. Hey, I'm Drew with Drew's Auto World. I'm Drew with Drew's Auto World. I'm Drew with Drew's Auto World. We have vans. Camper vans. 90s vans. Tan colored vans with a black stripe on top. Conversion van. We only have one van right now. But if you come by it, you give me money, and then I can go buy more vans to sell. That's right, some of you might remember this camper van I built a few years ago, and my time with it has finally come to an end. I'm going to be auctioning this off on eBay with a starting bid of $1. So all the details are over there if you're interested, and the link's in the description below.